Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 26th of April of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory in Ukraine, where the Russians, according to the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, the Russians continue their offensive operation, their major offensive operation along the entire line of combat contact. So first let's talk about the Sumy direction. During the previous 24 hours, additional explosions and attacks were recorded in the northern parts of the region. Here we can see the Sumy region, the city of Shostka, and the very heavy fire with the Russian drones. As for the Sumy direction itself, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded along the second defense layer. The Russians are about to re-establish complete control over the settlement of Kondratovka. Here we have a video published by pro-Ukrainian sources where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians in the area of the settlement with FPV drones. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we have colored the southern parts of the settlement under complete Russian control. Furthermore, according to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the southern parts, and we have reduced the infiltration area and we have colored the infiltration area as an area colored with the gray zone. Another important update is that the Russians began advancing, according to different sources, in the direction of the settlements by the name of Khotin and Pisarevka from the settlement of Mala Karchakovka. I would like to remind you that the Russians captured the settlement of Mala Karchakovka several weeks ago. The Russians most likely managed to finish regrouping, and now the Russians began advancing in the southwestern direction with the purpose to take these villages under complete control. These are very important villages because if Russians can take these villages under complete control, the Ukrainians will start suffering huge problems with the logistics, especially the front line between the villages of Ivolzhanskaya, Karchakovka and Krapivshina. As for the eastern Sumy direction, during the previous 24 hours, additional updates were reported about the village of Miropolye. The Russians are saying that currently there are very heavy clashes in this area and the Russians are moving further in the western direction. In this video, we can see how the Russians attacked another temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of Miropolye. So the Russians, it seems, are about to finish the battle for this village, and maybe in coming days we will receive additional updates on this matter. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kharkiv direction. During the previous 12 hours, nothing special was recorded, probably several things. The first one is that, according to information we have, a large-scale power outages and water supply disruptions were recorded in the city of Kharkiv. The metro and electric transport have stopped operating, and the sources are saying that this situation happened due to weather conditions. Another important thing is that the Russians began or intensified their attacks on the territory of the big Sumy forest, not the Sumy, on the big forest which is located to the northeast of the city of Kharkiv. During the previous day, additional attacks were recorded with aviation. The Russians, as you can see according to this video, were bombing these forests significantly with aviation, and the sources are saying that as for these forests, the Ukrainians concentrated a large group of forces in this area, and now the Russians are trying to force this group of forces either to fall back from this area, or at least the Russians are trying to reduce the number of units in this region. The Kupiansk direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes were recorded, especially in the area of the city of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. These are the changes on the ground. As we can see, the Ukrainians continue retreating from the eastern bank of the river Voskol towards the western bank of the river, and the Russians from their side continue offensive. Today, additional infiltration area was added. The Russians, according to different sources, have almost completely captured the southern parts of the settlement of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. Obviously, there are lots of mines, and the Russians have a lot of job to do before taking on this territory under complete control. So this is the reason why the Russians are so slow. The Russians are saying that the Ukrainians, when retreating, they mine almost every single square kilometer in this area, so that is why it takes time before the Russians are able to continue offensive operation and continue expanding territories under their control. So this is the reason why the Russians are not so fast. Too many mines, too many surprises left by the Ukrainians. Now let's talk about the Slaviansk direction. During the previous 12 hours, very interesting updates were received from the city of Liman. I would like to remind you that several days ago we discussed that the Ukrainians launched a counter-offensive operation in the direction of the city of Liman with the purpose to improve their positions around the city. And today we continue receiving updates on this matter. According to information we have, the Ukrainians continue counter-offensive, and as a result of a counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to recapture or to re-enter the southeastern part of the settlement of Drobyshevo. Furthermore, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions to the northeast of the city of Liman, but to the south of the settlement of Stavki. So as of now, very difficult to understand what is happening and why the Russians are retreating. Because according to the chief of the general staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, the Russians announced that several days ago they were controlling up to 70% of the city of Liman, but the latest updates that were published by neutral experts tell us that the Russians are retreating from the city and that the Ukrainians are trying to improve their positions around. Now let's talk about the Alexandrovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes were recorded. The Russians have almost captured this big forest to the southeast of Alexandrovka. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions to the south of the settlement of Krivoluka. So these are the changes, and we received lots of updates almost from the central part of the settlement of Alexandrovka. And during these videos, we can see how the Ukrainians were retreating from these territories, from these forests in the direction of the city. So we continue receiving updates that now Ukrainians are trying to retreat from these tree lines, so from these strongholds through this infiltrated area towards the settlement of Alexandrovka, and at the same time the Russians continue offensive operation from behind. So it seems that in coming days this entire infiltration area will be colored either as a gray zone or the territory under complete Russian control. So the battle for the gap is about to be finished, and sooner or later the Russians will start battle for the city of Alexandrovka in full strength. At the same time, according to different sources, the Russians have finished the battle for the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal on the Ukrainian side of Canal, which means that from these positions, the Russians, as we discussed in the previous videos, may try to continue or to start a major offensive operation towards the city of Kramatorsk. And with this offensive, the Russians will try to understand and will try to test whether the Ukrainians have enough of forces to control not just the Nikolaevka-Slaviansk direction, but also the Kramatorsk direction. As you can see, the Ukrainians have lots of fortifications in this area, but the question is whether the Ukrainians have enough of troops to control these fortifications. If not, the Russians most likely have enough of troops to take these strongholds under complete control and to dig in deeper. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates of FPV drone attacks, how Russians were attacking forces of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the city of Kramatorsk, which means that the situation in this area continues deteriorating. The city of Kostiantynivka. During the previous 24 hours, additional and significant changes were recorded in the most southwestern and the western parts of the city. And these are the changes on the ground between the dates. According to information we have, according to geolocations, the Russians have captured the western border of the city and the southwestern. We have a video published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians through the western part of the settlement, but the most important video is coming from the southeastern part of the settlement of Dovga Balka. Here we can see the same story. The Ukrainians were attacking Russians that were moving through this area. And once again, this is a very important video, and if you remember, during the previous days we were talking lots about papers and documents and lists, leaflets that the Russians were dropping in the area of the settlement of Dovga Balka, suggesting the Ukrainians to surrender. In this video we can see how exactly the Russians were doing this, and the Russians been doing this for previous 2 weeks, trying to force the Ukrainians not to show any resistance to the Russian forces. And most likely when the Russians finished this situation, they began their major offensive. And the first thing we received is the changes between the settlements of Dovga Balka and Constantinov. And according to these changes that we got yesterday, the Russians cut physically off 520 road and they cut the main logistic lines. And today we received the video that the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the southern parts of the settlement, which means that the major parts of the battle battle for this village has begun. So in coming days, most likely the village of Dovgabalka would be captured by the Russians completely, and this will allow the Russians to improve their flanks significantly. And from these positions, the Russians may try to advance further in the northwestern direction towards the settlement of Raskoshne and even towards the settlement of Miropolye. As for the Dobropolye direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything special. The same situation concerns the situation in the area of the city of Orekhov. So during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything from this area, just FPV drone attacks on the Ukraine's positions to the west of the villages and settlements of Vozdvizhevka and Verkhnya Tersa, but as you can see, without significant changes on the ground. We have covered most of the updates regarding the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. Once again, during the previous 36 hours, the Russians carried out one of the biggest attacks. I would like to remind you that just yesterday, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine stated that the Russians used 666 drones and missiles to attack the territory of Ukraine during the previous night. The Russians used 144 drones, and in total, we see that the Russians used 810 drones and missiles just during the previous 36 hours, and today we received the report that the Russians are ready to carry out the next massive attack that most likely will happen within the next 36 days and obviously before May's holidays. And another important thing is that the Russians attacked during these days the city of Dnipro. We have lots of videos about the situation in this area. Lots of warehouses, lots of ammo depots were destroyed by Russians. Most likely the Ukrainians were using the city of Dnipro as the main logistic hub for the Ukrainian forces who are currently fighting with the Russians in the Zaporozhye direction, but due to these attacks and strikes, it seems that Ukrainians most likely along the line of combat contact between the cities of Orekhov and Pokrovskaya Gavrilovka will have huge problems with supply and support, which most likely will give the Russians advantageous situation before advancing further deep inside of the territory of Ukraine as Zaporozhye and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Now we have covered most of updates. Now let's move further and let's talk about the situation in the Western Africa in the state by the name of Mali. As a day ago, just yesterday at 5 a.m., separatist groups of this state began anti-government offensive operations through the entire state of Mali. And according to information we have, as a result of clashes during the first hours of this offensive operation, the separatist groups managed to take under complete control lots of territories of the state of Mali. And several hours after this situation happened, the Russians, more precisely the Russian African Corps, former PMC Wagner group on the territory of Mali, and the government forces began a full-scale and a major counter-offensive operation through the entire state of Mali. And as a result of clashes, the coalition of the Russian African Corps and government forces managed to recapture and to establish complete control and to stabilize the city of Bamako, the capital of Mali. The sources reported that the situation was stabilized in the city of Kautila. Furthermore, the coalition managed to establish and to stabilize the situation in the area of the settlement of Siveria. And as for this territory, we have lots of updates on the matter of losses that the Russians suffered during these stabilization attempts. So the sources are saying that a helicopter of the African Russian Corps was damaged and destroyed. Furthermore, we received updates of how the aviation of the Russians were attacking the separatist forces in this. In this video, we can see airstrikes on the positions of separatists in this region. Lots of explosions were recorded. But despite these attacks, despite the situation on the ground, the coalition managed to stabilize the situation in this area. And the further we're moving in the northeastern direction, the more complicated situation was taking place. We had a report that the coalition of the government and the Russian African Corps managed to stabilize the situation also in the area of the settlement by the name of Gao, but we haven't received anything on this matter. And the most difficult situation is taking place in the most northeastern parts of Mali, in the area of the city by the name of Kidal. According to information we have, this city was captured by separatists. The Russians and the government forces were forced to retreat in the direction of the former United Nations base, which is located in the southwestern direction of this area. And during the day we received lots of updates on this matter. In this video we can see how edge positions of the coalition of the government forces and African Corps were retreating from their edge positions towards the base, towards the UN former base. Furthermore, we received reports how the separatist forces were checking and were controlling the coalition forces. Furthermore, we had reports that the coalition during this day were attacking the Russian African Corps. In this video, we can see how the Russian African Corps was carrying out airstrikes on Philae and the Jenim forces in Mali yesterday during their joint offensive. So now we know that there were lots of casualties, lots of losses from the separatist forces, and according to information we have, as for the city of Kidal, up to 1,000 soldiers were involved in this operation. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that during this conflict, during this crisis on the territory of Mali, up to 12,000 soldiers of separatists were involved in these operations. But the most important thing that there were reports that during the first hours, these separatist forces managed to take some territories under complete control, but in the end they lost battles with government forces because they didn't have bullets. They were empty. So that is why during the first hours they had initiative, but when they were completely empty, the government forces and the African Russian Corps managed to recapture the lost positions. But this doesn't concern the northeastern parts. Most likely in coming days, the situation in this region will intensify when the coalition will begin a counter-offensive operation. Now let's talk about the conflict on the territory of Middle East. Obviously, no ceasefire will continue in this area. The President of the United States of America issued another ultimatum to the Iranian side saying that the Iranians have just 3 days before their energy infrastructure will be destroyed completely. So another important thing that yesterday there should be negotiations between the Iranian and the US delegations, but the President of the United States of America cancelled this negotiation process and asked his delegation to return back to the United States of America. I just cancelled the trip of my representatives going to Islamabad, Pakistan to meet with the Iranians. Too much time wasted on traveling, too much work. So the Iranians have just 3 days to make a decision to accept the US demands or to not accept them, and then most likely the clashes will resume. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours there was an assassination attempt on the President of the United States of America, and this video was published by the President of States, where we can see how a person was trying to break through the security layers of the president, and according to this video he managed to do this. Now let's return back to the Middle East. So both the Iranians and the United States of America continue the dual blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. In this picture we can see the Al Raid Brook class guided missile destroyer US Rafael Peralta escorting the Iranian flagged crude oil tanker in the Indian Ocean, enforcing the ongoing blockade by the United States. In this picture we can see, and according to different sources, an Iranian Shadow Fleet tanker Sevan, which was sanctioned yesterday by the United States Department of Treasury, was intercepted by a US Navy helicopter from the US Pinkay. Furthermore, we have reports that four empty oil tankers attempting to re-enter Iran have been identified in the east of Pakistan. So the situation remains tense in this area. The Iranians from their side stated that it had seized two large container ships in the Strait of Hormuz, Francesca and Epaminondas, linked to Israel. So 3 days will pass very soon, and most likely then everything will begin. And everything most likely will begin because, according to information we have, the situation, the clashes and the buffer zone operation resumed in the southern parts of Lebanon. According to information we have, we start receiving new updates on airstrikes carried out by the Israeli Defense Forces in the southern parts of the state. Lots of videos were published. Another important thing that we start receiving changes on the ground. According to information we have, the Israeli Defense Forces managed to improve their positions significantly along the border in the southern parts of Lebanon and in the southeastern parts of Lebanon. So these are the changes on the ground, and most likely the Israeli Defense Forces will continue. So the situation is quite complicated. As we can see, we have lots of stress points, lots of hard points on the surface of planet, and it seems that these hard points, the number of these hard points are going to increase in days, in months within this year. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.